check my pack again. My boots are tight. The laces are snug. The morning air is cool on my face as I step onto the narrow dirt trail that leads into the thick forest. Mist floats among the pine trunks, and the forest smells like damp earth. The trail is soft underfoot, pinned with fallen needles. I raise my head and see tall trees reaching up to a gray sky. My breath makes small puffs in front of my mouth. Dew beads on leaves. I have water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, my flashlight, and a small camera. I've hiked early every summer morning, but this time I chose a new route, an unmarked side trail I found in a local hiking blog. The writer said it passed through a secluded canyon and had views of a waterfall and a small cave. I felt curious. I wanted to feel small in the wild. I wanted to push a little gear I'd never tried. That trail winds beyond the main path, starting with a steep descent alongside a moss-covered rock wall. I feel the roadless nature of it. No footprints other than mine, mud clods on the edges, some branches broken overhead. Already there's heaviness in the forest, a sense of depth. I keep a steady pace, though I know I must save energy for the return climb. The first 2 hours pass easily. I stop at a shallow creek that cuts across the trail. The water is low but clear, trickling over stones. I place a boot in it and feel the chill. I bend close, fill my water bottle from the flow after using my filter straw. I sit on a flat rock and sip slowly. Nothing but wind and dripping leaves. No birds of note, no animals, just silence and the whisper of water. I eat a granola bar. I stretch my legs. I check my map and compass. I make notes on my camera, the angle of the sun, the time 9:18 a.m. The next section of trail climbs more, switchbacks up a hill toward a ridge. I feel the incline in my thighs. Sweat collects on my shirt under the pack straps. I hear something, a crack of a branch above. I look up. A limb broke in the canopy, but I see no bird, just sky and leaves. I freeze. My heart thumps, but then quiet again. I remind myself wildlife often avoids humans. The trail bends to the right. I test each step carefully, looking for loose rock. My boots grip earth, pine needles, roots. The tree trunk next to the trail is wide, rough bark. Moss and lichens cling to it. I reach over and brush the moss with my palm. It gives slightly and smells like green dampness. I climb for another hour. Sunlight filters in bands. I can feel the shifting angle in the light. The forest floor changes. Pine turns to fir. The ground thickens with needled mulch. Small plants poke through. Ferns, little wildflowers. The trail narrows. At one point, it's just a foot-wide rock wall on left, ravine on right. Air moves in the ravine, cool breeze that makes hair lift. Below, I hear a faint roar. Water? Keep going. Then I see it. Through trees, at the bottom of the ravine, a waterfall. Not huge, but water falls maybe 15 feet into a pool, then flows onward into the creek I crossed earlier. Spray rises and catches light. I pause for breath. The climb has been steep. My legs are shaky, but seeing that waterfall gives me a charge. I raise the camera and take pictures from the safe side of the trail. The air smells of damp rocks and wet wood. I stay long enough to record the sound, water striking stone. It's loud but natural, not overwhelming. I know the cave is near the base of that waterfall. The blog said it's just behind the water curtain. I descend carefully. The trail becomes steeper. I use my hands at times to grip roots. I reach a flat bench of rock behind the flowing water. There's a thin curtain of mist. I push aside a few ferns and step behind the sheet of water. It's dark. I shine my flashlight. The rain of drops hits your jacket with light taps. The inside of the cave is shallow, not deep, maybe 20 feet back, wide enough for one person to stand and turn around. Walls are damp gray stone, slick with moss and algae. Water droplets cling above and drip. I feel a drop on my cheek. I move slowly, careful not to slip. I crouch and take pictures. Every sound echoes faintly. Dripping, the waterfall roar. I inspect walls. Striations in the rock, hints of mineral layers. I scoop a handful of water that pooled on the floor, cold, fresh. I empty it in my water bottle. I fill another bottle from the creek. I rise and step out from behind the waterfall. Water mists my hair. I wring my jacket sleeve. I examine my hands. Little cuts from rough stone and edges of rocks. I bandage them quickly. Then I settle on a dry boulder and eat. Nuts, dried fruit. I sip water. Time feels slowed. It's around midday. Shadows short, dusk still far away. I rest 15 minutes, then begin my climb back up the way I came. I take a different angle to avoid slippery rock behind the waterfall. I follow the trail upward. The descent went smoothly, but on the climb back to the ridge, about 2 hours in, I begin to feel something off. My energy lags. My legs hurt. I eat more snacks. I drink water, but the incline seems steeper than before. The sun has edged west, slanting through the trees, shadows lengthening. I sweat, but now cooler air chills me. My shirt becomes damp and sticky. I keep checking time. 2:30 p.m. I still have a couple of hours before sunset. The trail forks unexpectedly. No sign or cut mark. One branch leads upward steeply to high ridge. The other stays under trees along a kernel. I'm not sure which is the way I came. I hesitate. I look for footprints. Nothing reliable. I check my compass. Trail initial direction was northeast. One branch heads north, the other east. The map shows a ridge to the northeast. I pick the northern fork. It rises steeper, no shade at first, more rocky. Loose scree. I grip small trees beside the trail. My breathing high. I climb. After 30 minutes, I crest a peak. But the view is different. Not the ridge I expected. Instead, I see a deeper ravine. The sun is low. No markers. I realize I took the wrong fork. Panic enters. I'm lost. My pack weighs heavy. I check water. I have maybe a liter left. I check energy snacks. 2 remaining bars. I check light. I have headlamp. Battery full. Phone, weak service. Maybe 1 bar. I tell myself, okay, stay calm. I backtrack. Down from the peak softly, retracing foot placement. But scree shifts. My ankle twists slightly. I stop. Pain sharp. I press above and below. Not broken. Bruised. I continue. By now, the forest changes. Taller evergreens. Twisted trunks. Underbrush thick. I follow downhill direction, hoping it intersects the creek. Time. 4:15 p.m. Shadows lengthen. I hear faint creek sound far below. Encouraging. I go down toward sound. The hill is steep. Loose debris underfoot. I slip once, catch myself on roots. My rear pack digs into my shoulders. I keep balancing by pressing palms on tree bark as I move downward. The creek roar grows. Finally, I find it. The same creek. Good sign. New direction. Westward leads to the main trail. I follow the water channel downhill. But the creek bed is rocky, forceful. Pick wet stones. Mud slick. Every step I test. If I fall, I could break bones. But I stay steady. About 20 minutes later, I see a familiar flat crossing point where I first filtered water. I take a breath and kneel by the water to drink. I rest 5 minutes. Look at phone. Still 1 bar. No call yet. Battery 70%. I refill L water via filter. Turning toward the ridge again. Up a steep climb for about an hour. My legs ache. Sun is low and fading. Now around 5:30 p.m. I race upward past switchbacks. Every handful of soil and step tires me. I push. My shirt damp with sweat but cooler air stings. At one bend I stop, lean forward, hands on knees. I breathe through my mouth. I let legs rest. The ridge above glows in late light. I stand, pick up pack. I climb more steadily. Finally, I reach the ridgetop I had aimed for. A wide rocky plateau with pines scattered. The sky is orange-pink. I feel lightheaded. I sit again on a flat rock. I take 2 sips of the last snack bar. I eat slowly. I sip water. Then I feel safe. Then comes the final stretch. The main trail leads down a gentle slope to the trailhead. I know I'm around half a mile from the parking lot. Keep going. My body is exhausted, but my spirit lifts. I step after step. The dirt trail firm and predictable. At the edge, I see tall trees giving way to open meadow. I emerge into the meadow at 6:15 p.m. sun low. It started out as a normal trip. I had been planning a solo hiking journey for months, something I could do by myself to clear my head. Life in the city had become too noisy, too fast, and I needed something quieter, something that would slow things down. I picked an isolated trail in the northern region of Montana, somewhere away from the usual tourist spots. It was deep in the forest and stretched for nearly 30 miles. Most of it was unmarked except for a few faded signs and a trail map I got online. The plan was to hike 10 miles a day and camp along the way. I packed light but smart. I had my tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, freeze-dried meals, enough water for the first 2 days, a filter, a solar charger for my GPS, and a journal I brought to write about the journey. I left my car at the tiny gravel parking area at the base of the trailhead. There were no other cars, just mine. I made a note of that. The first day went smooth. The weather was cool, just how I liked it, and the sun stayed behind a soft layer of clouds. I followed the trail up through the woods, climbing slow but steady. The pine trees were thick and the air smelled clean. Every now and then, I'd stop to take in the silence. No traffic, no voices, just the wind and birds. I saw a couple of deer, a rabbit, and what looked like bear tracks, but old ones. Nothing to worry about. I set up camp before dusk, about 10 miles in, just off the trail near a small stream. I filtered some water, cooked a simple meal, and crawled into my tent as the air got cold. I read a little and wrote a few notes in my journal. My mind was finally starting to quiet down. I slept well that night. The second day was when things started to feel off. Not bad, just different. It was mostly the feeling that I wasn't completely alone anymore. I'd stop and listen sometimes, hearing nothing but leaves moving, but the hairs on my arms would stand up, like something was watching. But every time I looked around, it was just trees. I kept hiking. About 5 miles in, I came across a weird pile of rocks. It wasn't just random. Someone had clearly stacked them. About 20 or so, all different sizes, stacked neatly like a cone. Nothing around it, no sign or marker. It looked out of place. I took a picture of it and moved on. That night, I made camp again, farther off the trail this time. I picked a spot near a fallen tree and dug a small fire pit. I had enough dry twigs to get a small fire going, more for comfort than warmth. While eating, I heard rustling about 50 feet away. It didn't sound like an animal, it was too steady, like footsteps on leaves. I froze and held my breath. It stopped after a few seconds. I stayed completely still, waiting to hear it again, but nothing came. I didn't sleep much that night. The third day was rough. I felt tired and uneasy. I kept glancing behind me more than I should have. The trail grew steeper and the trees got denser. I was at the midpoint of the hike now, too far to turn back easily. I figured it was just nerves. Too much time alone in the woods can mess with your head. That's what I told myself. Then I saw another rock pile. Same kind of stack, same shape, just a mile past where I had camped. It hadn't been there the day before. I was sure of it. I stood there staring at it, trying to understand who would build these. There were no other hikers out here, no fresh boot prints. The dirt on the trail looked undisturbed. Later that afternoon, the wind picked up and clouds rolled in. I decided to set up camp early, thinking rain might be coming. I found a spot tucked between two hills with a bit of cover from the wind. I had just finished securing my tent when I noticed something hanging from a low branch nearby. I walked over and saw it was a piece of string, tied around a small animal skull. Clean, white, probably a squirrel or a rabbit. It swung lightly in the wind. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and returned to my tent. That night, I kept the fire going as long as I could. I didn't cook. I wasn't hungry. I listened hard, every little sound making me sit up straight. At one point, I thought I heard breathing just outside the tent, slow and deep. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out there, but nothing. I waited and waited, and eventually, I must have passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, I found fresh prints around my tent. Not boots, bare feet, human. I felt sick when I saw them. Whoever it was had walked around the tent twice, then off into the woods. The prints were deep in the mud. Whoever it was had been heavy or carrying something. I packed up fast and got back on the trail. From then on, I moved fast. I barely stopped. I checked my GPS again and again, just making sure I was on track. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Every sound felt like a threat. Branches breaking, birds flying off, leaves rustling. I kept looking over my shoulder. I never saw anyone, but the feeling that I was being followed grew stronger. I reached the last camp area by early evening. It was a small clearing, flat enough for the tent. I didn't bother with a fire. I set up quick, ate some jerky, and stayed alert. The woods around me felt like they were closing in. The air was still. No wind, no birds, just silence. It was worse than noise. That night was the longest of my life. I lay still inside the tent, eyes open, listening. Sometime after midnight, I heard a twig snap, then another, then a low grunt. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like a person, slow and raspy. I couldn't move. I held my breath, heart hammering. Something brushed against the side of my tent. Then nothing. I didn't sleep at all. At first light, I packed everything in minutes and got moving. The final stretch of the trail was only about 8 miles. I told myself just to keep walking, no stopping. I could rest once I got back to my car. About halfway down, I found a torn piece of cloth stuck on a branch beside the trail. It looked like it came from a shirt. It was stained, not with mud, something darker. I didn't look too closely. I walked faster. The last 2 miles felt like forever. I could feel someone or something in the trees, just off the trail, keeping pace with me. I didn't run. I thought about it, but I was too tired and too scared of falling. I just kept moving. When I finally saw the trailhead sign, I almost cried. My car was still there. Nothing broken, no signs of damage. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove without even changing out of my hiking boots. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 2 hours away. I didn't report it. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That someone had followed me in the woods and left footprints? That I heard noises and saw rock piles? They would have told me I imagined it or that it was a bear. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, getting closer every night. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still think about it, though. Sometimes I'll wake up at night, heart racing. Sure, I heard something outside my window. I'll get up and check the locks, check behind the curtains, make sure everything's secure. I tell myself I'm safe now, that I got out. But that feeling that something was out there, following me, never really left. And the worst part is, I'll never know who it was, or why they were there, or what they wanted. I just know I was lucky enough to make it out, and that next time I might not be. I decided to hike alone in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. I planned the trip for months. I wanted to go off-grid for a while, away from my phone, my job, my city apartment. I picked a loop trail that was about 42 miles long, something I could finish in 4 to 5 days. It wasn't too popular, but it wasn't completely empty either, which I liked. I figured I'd see a few people on the trail, but still get a lot of solitude. The trail started near a small dirt parking lot that barely had a sign. I left my car there early in the morning and started walking. The air was crisp, the pine trees dense, and the sun was just coming up over the hills. I had a good backpack, lightweight tent, a reliable filter for water, and more than enough food. I trained my legs for this. The first day was uneventful but beautiful. The trail wound through tall forests and opened up into big alpine meadows with flowers and creeks running through them. I stopped by a lake for lunch, took my boots off, and let my feet dry. I only saw 2 people that whole day, both going the opposite direction. We just nodded to each other and kept going. I made camp just off the trail near a creek, ate some dehydrated food, and got into my sleeping bag early. I was tired but feeling good. My legs were a little sore, but not bad. I slept pretty well, though I woke up a couple times from wind pushing through the trees. The second day, things changed. The weather was still good, but something felt off. I can't explain it well. I started seeing boot prints that didn't match mine. That wasn't strange, but they were fresh. I figured someone was ahead of me, maybe someone hiking the loop in the same direction. But every time I stopped to take a break and looked behind me, I didn't see anyone. I kept thinking I heard footsteps in the trees behind me, just far enough away that I couldn't be sure. Once or twice I stopped and listened, and the forest would go dead silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling. Then it would all come back at once. It gave me chills. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Around midday, I crossed a small footbridge over a stream. It was made from a few old planks and had no railing. Right after crossing it, I looked back and noticed something strange. One of the planks was wet. The rest were dry. I had just crossed, and my boots weren't soaked enough to make a print like that. It looked like someone had crossed it right after me. I didn't see anyone. Not ahead, not behind. I moved faster. By late afternoon, I reached a ridgeline with a steep drop on one side. The wind was strong, and I had to concentrate on my footing. I didn't want to be up there when it got dark, so I pushed on until I found a flat spot below the ridge, among some trees. I set up my tent and ate quickly. As I was brushing my teeth behind some bushes, I felt it again. That sense that I wasn't alone. I stood there with the toothbrush in my mouth, not moving, just listening. I didn't hear anything at first. Then, faintly, I thought I heard the crunch of a boot on dirt. Just one. Then nothing. I waited for 10 minutes, staring into the dark. Then I went back to my tent, zipped it up tight, and didn't sleep much. Day 3 started with fog. Thick fog. I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. Everything felt muffled. I packed up and started hiking slowly. The trail was harder to follow now, and my GPS only worked off and on. I didn't want to get lost, so I stuck close to where the trail should be, checking my paper map often. About an hour in, I saw something that made my stomach turn. On a tree next to the trail, there was a mark. Someone had carved a symbol into the bark. It looked like a simple X with a line through it, fresh, like it had been cut just that morning. I kept moving. Then, about 30 minutes later, I saw another mark. Same symbol, different tree. I hadn't seen anything like that on the first day, or even yesterday. Felt like I was being watched, or worse, followed. I started checking over my shoulder more often. Still, I didn't see anyone. The fog lifted by late morning, and the sun warmed things up. I walked fast and skipped lunch. I just wanted to get to my next camp. Mid-afternoon, I saw movement up ahead. Finally, I thought I might be catching up to whoever was ahead of me. I pushed harder, hoping to see someone and maybe feel less alone. But when I rounded the bend, no one was there. Just more forest and more trail. I checked for prints again and saw a few, but they weren't clear. Then I saw it. A pile of stones next to the trail. It was small and neat, like a little cairn, but there was a strip of blue fabric tied around the top stone. That color was too bright to be natural. It looked like it had been cut from clothing. I didn't touch it. I moved on. That night, I made camp early, near a small pond. I found a spot where I could see far in all directions. I didn't want to be tucked in the woods anymore. I ate cold food and didn't even set up my tent properly. I just got inside and zipped up. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. A snapping branch. Close. Too close. I didn't move. My hand slowly reached for the knife I kept near me. I lay there, barely breathing. I heard another sound, like a foot dragging through leaves. Then silence. I stayed awake until dawn. When I finally got out of the tent, I looked around. I didn't see anyone, but near the edge of the pond, I found something that hadn't been there before. Another stone pile. Same shape. No fabric this time, but fresh. I broke it apart with my boot and left fast. The 4th day was supposed to be the easiest, all downhill. I planned to finish by late afternoon and get back to the trailhead. I moved quickly. My legs hurt, my back ached, and I was out of patience. But something wasn't right with the trail. It looked different. I saw signs of recent erosion, trees that had fallen over what should have been the main path. At one point, I realized I was off trail. My GPS showed I was close, but not on it. I backtracked, then saw something that froze me. A third stone pile. This one had a feather in it. I checked my map again, and something clicked. These weren't random. They were showing up at spots where the trail split or where you could make a wrong turn. It was like someone was guiding me or misleading me. I finally got back on the main trail, or what I hoped was the main trail. I saw older boot prints and even a crushed plastic bottle someone had dropped, which made me feel better. I followed the trail as fast as I could, ignoring the pain in my legs. Then I saw something that made my heart sink. My own boot print, next to the same footbridge from 2 days ago. I had looped back. Somehow I had circled around. I dropped my pack and sat down. I felt sick. I had plenty of food and water, but I was so tired. I didn't understand how I had gotten turned around so badly. I looked at my map again, then the GPS. They weren't matching. I didn't stay there long. I started back the other way, moving fast, refusing to stop. I didn't care about soreness or blisters. I just wanted out. That night, I didn't camp. I hiked through the dark with my headlamp. The batteries were fresh. I only stopped once to drink some water. I kept checking my map, hoping to see a feature I recognized. Just after 3 a.m., I saw lights, actual lights. I thought I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. It was the parking lot. My car was there. I walked straight to it, unlocked the door, and sat down behind the wheel. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there. When the sun started to rise, I finally left. I didn't report anything. Who would I tell? I hadn't seen a person. No one had touched me or spoken to me. I had just been followed, maybe, watched, led in circles. Maybe it was just a bad trip. Maybe someone was messing with hikers for fun. But it felt worse than that. I haven't gone hiking alone since. Started out like any other solo hiking trip. I had done at least a dozen hikes that year, all solo, all in different national parks. I liked the quiet, the focus it gave me, and the peace that came with being away from people. That weekend, I picked a lesser-known trail system in the northern part of Idaho. Not too remote, but not a tourist trap either. I chose it because the trailhead started off a small logging road, and the route was supposed to loop around several high ridgelines, giving long views of forest and lakes below. It wasn't an official national forest trail, which made it more appealing to me. I drove out there early on a Friday morning. My car, an older Subaru, handled the rough road pretty well. It was bumpy and narrow, with tree branches brushing both sides of the car as I crept along for the final 3 miles. When I got to the trailhead, there was one other car parked there, a dark green pickup. I made a mental note of it, tossed my pack on, locked my doors, and headed into the trees. The trail started out wide and easy, dirt packed hard from the sun, pine needles layering everything. The air smelled sharp and clean. I was making good time and had planned to camp on a ridge about 10 miles in. The trail would split in two about 6 miles in, and I would take the fork that led higher up. I hiked steady all morning, stopping only to drink water and check my map. I saw no one, no noise, just birds and the occasional snap of something in the underbrush. I figured it was small wildlife. Around noon, I reached the fork. There was no sign, just a slight clearing and a faint trail splitting off uphill. The terrain was rougher here, steeper climbs, looser rock, fallen trees. I kept going, stopping more often to catch my breath. I reached the top of the first major ridge around 3 p.m. The view was incredible. I could see a chain of lakes down in the valley, reflecting the sky. The wind was stronger up there, and I decided to camp a little lower in the tree line where I'd be more sheltered. I hiked another half-mile down the other side and found a decent flat patch among the trees. There was an old fire ring, blackened rocks in a circle, and some cleared ground around it. It looked like someone had camped there before. That was fine by me. I set up my small tent, rolled out my sleeping pad, and started boiling water for my dehydrated meal. It was quiet except for the wind in the branches and a woodpecker tapping somewhere nearby. After eating, I wandered a bit to look around the area, making mental notes of any landmarks. A strange sense of being watched crept into me, not from any sound or sight, just a feeling. I brushed it off. that sometimes happened when I camped alone. Your brain plays tricks on you when you're away from everything. I went back to my tent as the light faded, read a few pages from a paperback I brought, then settled in for the night. I woke up once in the night. I didn't know why. It was dark, not even moonlight. I lay still, heart pounding, listening. Nothing, just silence. I must have dreamed something. I eventually drifted off again. The next morning was cold and foggy. My gear was damp from the night air. I packed up quickly and got back on the trail. My plan was to finish the loop and get back to the car by late afternoon. I followed the ridge a while longer, then started descending into thicker forest. That's when things got strange. The trail was still there, but fainter. I figured fewer people went this way. I wasn't worried. I had the route loaded on my GPS. But after an hour, I noticed something odd. The trail began to bend west, not east, which wasn't right according to the map. I double-checked my GPS. It was showing the trail behind me. Somehow I had gone off route. I backtracked, but the trail I had come in on was gone. I looked all around. Nothing, just trees and underbrush. I walked in circles for a while, trying to find the worn path I had followed. No luck. I sat down, drank some water, and forced myself to think clearly. I wasn't panicking yet, but something felt off. I pulled out my map again, tried to line it up with the terrain. I picked a direction that I believed would get me back to the main ridge and started walking. The trees closed in thicker now. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and moss. There was no sign of any trail. I kept going, checking my GPS every 10 minutes, but the signal kept cutting out. I had enough daylight left, but I wasn't covering ground fast. Everything started to look the same. By late afternoon, I knew I was lost. Really lost. The terrain didn't match the map at all anymore. Hills that shouldn't be there, gullies too deep. I hadn't seen a single sign of human presence since morning. I found a small clearing and decided to stay the night. Better than hiking in circles in the dark. I set up my tent again and forced down some food. The air felt heavier, like the forest was pressing in. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing things. Not animals, just noises, sticks snapping, movement. But every time I sat up and listened, there was nothing. I didn't have a fire, didn't want to draw attention. I lay there with my knife in hand, wide awake most of the night. Morning came and the fog was thick again. I decided to keep moving west. That had to lead me back toward the trailhead eventually. I moved slow. My legs were tired. My pack felt heavier. Every little sound made me stop. Once I thought I saw movement through the trees. Person maybe. But when I moved toward it, there was nothing there. Just brush. I called out once. No answer. Not even an echo. Hours passed. My GPS finally got a signal again, just briefly. It showed me way off the trail, almost 5 miles south of where I should have been. That made no sense. I hadn't walked that far south. I was sure of it. But now I couldn't trust anything. I kept going, my water running low. In the late afternoon, I stumbled into something that made my heart race. An old structure. A cabin, half-rotted. Not marked on any map. The roof had caved in, but the walls still stood. I approached it carefully. It looked abandoned for decades. The wood was dark with rot. No windows, just a broken door hanging off one hinge. I didn't want to go in, but I needed shelter. Inside, it smelled of mildew and old wood. There was a collapsed cot, rusted metal frame, and what looked like some tools long rusted through. No signs of recent use, but still, it gave me shelter for the night. I shut the door as best I could and sat with my back against the far wall. That night was the worst. I didn't sleep at all. I kept hearing movement outside. Slow crunching like footsteps, then nothing, then more crunching closer. I wanted to believe it was a deer or something, but it didn't sound like one. The steps would stop just outside the wall, like whatever it was listening. I gripped my knife tighter, breathing shallow. I didn't move until the sun rose. I bolted out of that place the second I could see again. I didn't even eat. I just ran. I followed the sun west, crashing through brush, climbing over logs. I didn't stop. Around midday, I hit a logging road. Not the one I came in on, but I didn't care. I followed it. 2 hours later, a truck came around the bend. I flagged it down, waving like a maniac. The driver stopped, clearly startled. I must have looked terrible, muddy, scratched up, pale. He gave me a ride back into the nearest town, about 30 miles away. I didn't tell him much, just that I got turned around. He offered me water and food. I thanked him. At the ranger station in town, they looked up the trail system. No reports of others missing. That was fine by me. I didn't want to tell them what I really experienced. I just said I took a wrong turn, got lost, and found my way back. That was over a year ago. I haven't hiked alone since. I still dream about that cabin sometimes, about the sounds outside, about the miles of forest that didn't match any map. I've tried to find that trail system again online. Can't, like it never existed. But I know I was there. I still have the knife. I keep it by my bed now, just in case. It was early September when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through the mountains in central Idaho. I had just turned 33, and life had been piling up on me. Work stress, relationship issues, and just that heavy, quiet feeling that something was off. I figured a few days out in the woods might help me clear my head. I had no plan to do anything extreme, just a long, slow hike through some remote forest trails that hardly anyone used. I wanted isolation. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be away from everything for a little while. I packed my gear carefully. I'd done enough hiking over the years to know what mattered: sturdy boots, waterproof layers, extra food, enough water, a filter, and my topographic map. I had a reliable GPS, a compass, a small tent, and a light sleeping bag. I checked everything twice, loaded up my pack, and drove out to a small pull-off where the trailhead started. There was no one else there when I arrived, and that made me feel exactly the way I hoped to feel, like I was walking into the wilderness alone. The trail started as a narrow dirt path between tall pine trees. The forest was dense, and the smell of pine needles and damp earth followed me with every step. I had that peaceful feeling at first, the one where all the little noises from animals moving through the brush don't scare you but comfort you. I moved slowly and took it all in, trying to shake off the noise of my life back in the city. The first day was smooth. I hiked about 10 miles before setting up camp on a flat ridge that overlooked a valley. The view was perfect, just layers of trees stretching out beneath me and the mountains folding over each other in the distance. I boiled water, ate a simple meal, and crawled into my tent just after the sun went down. The night was cool but not cold, and I fell asleep fast. The next morning, I felt strong and well-rested. I packed up, ate a protein bar, and kept walking. The trail turned rougher after that. It hadn't been maintained in a while, and sections of it were overgrown. I had to push through brush and watch my footing as I climbed over loose rock. Still, it was manageable and I felt confident. Around noon, I came across something strange, a rusted piece of metal half buried in the dirt. I knelt down and brushed some of the earth away. It looked like a twisted piece of an old camping stove. Nearby, there were other pieces: shattered plastic, a cracked mug, even a torn section of tarp tangled in the roots of a tree. Everything looked weathered, like it had been out there for years. It didn't sit right with me. I stood there for a long moment, trying to picture how someone would have just left this stuff behind. Hikers don't usually do that. I looked around for signs of a trail camp, but it was just woods. No fire ring, no flat ground, just forest. I decided not to linger. I kept hiking deeper. The trail narrowed even more until I wasn't sure if I was even on it anymore. Every now and then I'd spot an old trail marker carved into a tree or a faded ribbon tied to a branch, but it was getting harder to follow. I had to rely more on my map and GPS. The terrain got rough and I slipped a few times on loose stones. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing next to a creek. It seemed like a good spot to camp, even though it didn't have a lot of cover. I was tired, and I just wanted to rest. I set up my tent, collected water, and sat by the creek for a while. The sky turned orange, then dark. I felt a little uneasy for the first time, but I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I wasn't used to being this far from other people. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing noises outside the tent. Not animals rustling in the bushes, but short, sudden sounds. Snaps, quick steps, maybe even breathing. Every time I sat up to listen, it went quiet. I kept my knife nearby and tried to calm myself down. I told myself it was probably deer or maybe a bear passing through. Still, I barely slept. In the morning, I checked around my camp. Nothing was disturbed. My food was untouched. No tracks. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I packed up fast and kept hiking. I thought maybe I'd just been imagining things. The trail got even more difficult. There were no signs of recent travel. The trees grew tighter, and the ground was a mess of roots and rocks. I stopped a few times to rest, but every time I did, I had this sense that I shouldn't stay in one place too long. It wasn't a fear of animals. It was something else, something more human. Like I wasn't alone. Late that afternoon, I realized I'd gone too far. The trail was gone. I checked my GPS, and it showed me in the middle of nowhere. The elevation was climbing, and the terrain was getting worse. I tried to double back to find the last trail marker, but it all looked the same. Pines, brush, steep inclines. I couldn't find the path. I spent the next few hours trying to find my way back, but it only made things worse. I was turned around. I could tell I was going in circles. I started to panic. I stopped and forced myself to calm down. I marked my location on the GPS, then found a flat spot near some boulders to camp for the night. I figured I'd wait until morning and use the daylight to find my bearings. That night was worse. The noises came back, louder. I heard what sounded like voices, low, hushed, quick. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't animals. It wasn't wind. I didn't imagine it. I laid still in my tent, knife in hand, trying not to make a sound. At one point, I swear I saw a light moving through the trees. It wasn't a flashlight beam, just a soft glow. It flickered between the trees like someone walking with a lantern. I kept absolutely still. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The light moved off and disappeared, but I didn't sleep at all after that. In the morning, I packed my things and decided to head west. I didn't care about finishing the hike anymore. I just wanted to get out. I had enough food and water to last a couple more days if I rationed right. I moved fast, bushwhacking through the woods, scraping up my arms on branches, slipping on loose dirt. I stopped using the trail completely and followed the GPS toward a point where I knew the Forest Service roads should be. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the terrain threw something new at me. Steep climbs, thick underbrush, slippery slopes. I fell once and cut my leg on a sharp rock. Blood soaked into my pants. I tied it up with a bandana and limped on. I started seeing strange things again. More old camping gear, broken poles, bits of cloth, an old boot half covered in moss. Everything looked like it had been out here for years, but it kept showing up. I passed what looked like a collapsed shelter, just a frame of logs and branches. There were scraps of clothing caught in the bark. It all felt wrong. The final night was the worst. I found a hollow beneath a rock outcrop and set up there, trying to hide myself. I didn't cook anything. I didn't make a fire. I sat in the dark, cold and sore, clutching the knife, listening. I heard something walking nearby. I heard it pause. Then I heard breathing. Deep, slow breathing just outside the rock shelf. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just sat there in the dark, completely still. After a while, the sound faded, and I was alone again. But I knew I had to leave. I knew I had to get out no matter what. In the morning, I ditched most of my gear to move faster. I only kept water, my map, and a few essentials. I forced myself to keep going. I climbed up a ridge, and finally, in the distance, I saw a sliver of something. Maybe a road, maybe a cut in the trees. I kept moving toward it. Took hours, but I finally reached a logging road. It was barely used, overgrown in places, but it was real. I followed it for nearly a full day before I found a Forest Service station. It was closed for the season, but there was a working radio. I called for help, and hours later, a ranger truck picked me up. They asked what happened. I told them I got lost. I didn't tell them about the breathing, or the lights, or the gear I found. I just said I got off trail. They said it happens more than people think. They told me about other hikers who'd gone missing in the area over the years. Most were never found. I didn't say anything else. I just sat in the truck as they drove me back to town, staring out the window at the forest, wondering how close I came to being one of them. I haven't gone hiking alone since then. I still think about it sometimes, about what might have been out there with me. Not something supernatural, not some ghost story, just something real, something human, something watching, and I don't ever want to see it again. I've done a lot of solo hikes over the years. Most of them were peaceful, quiet, and exactly what I needed to reset. I've always preferred being out in the woods alone with just my pack and the sound of nature around me. I don't hike for the adrenaline or to chase some kind of thrill. I hike to get away. But one trip last summer changed everything. I haven't hiked alone since. It was the third week of July. I had taken a few days off from work and planned to hike through a stretch of trail in the northern part of Idaho, near the border with Montana. I'd researched the area, marked out a route that would take me about 3 days round trip, and packed accordingly. The weather was supposed to be decent, dry, with highs in the 70s and lows in the 40s. Perfect conditions. I parked at a small trailhead just past a logging road. The area was remote, no ranger station, no other cars. Just a wooden sign with a faded map and a dirt path leading into the trees. I signed the trail register, locked my truck, and set off. My plan was to follow the main trail about 10 miles to a lake, camp there the first night, then loop around and hit a ridgeline trail that would eventually bring me back. The first day went fine. I moved slowly, stopped to take pictures, drank plenty of water, and reached the lake around 5 p.m. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet, beautiful, and still. The water reflected the trees around it like a mirror, and the only sounds were the occasional bird and the wind through the branches. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground a little ways back from the shoreline, cooked a simple dinner, then sat on a log and watched the sun go down behind the trees. As darkness settled, I crawled into my tent and listened to the insects buzzing outside. I had no cell service, but I didn't care. That's how I liked it. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the tent, grabbed my headlamp, and stepped outside. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust, then walked a few yards into the trees. As I did my business, I noticed the silence again. No crickets, no frogs, no wind, just complete stillness. I went back to the tent and tried to fall asleep, but something felt off. I kept thinking I heard soft sounds, twigs snapping, a light rustle of leaves, but every time I sat up and listened, there was nothing. Eventually, I managed to sleep a few more hours. The next morning, I woke up early. I ate a protein bar, packed up my gear, and started toward the ridgeline trail. The climb was slow, steady, and beautiful. I passed wildflowers, thick pine groves, and a few open meadows with tall grass swaying in the breeze. I didn't see another person. I didn't expect to. By early afternoon, I reached a plateau with a view that stretched for miles. I could see rolling green hills, distant rocky peaks, and the lake far below where I'd camped the night before. I sat for a bit, resting, and then moved on. That's when things started to go wrong. The trail narrowed as it followed along the side of a steep slope. There were a few downed trees across the path, but nothing unusual. I stepped over one, then another, and then came to a spot where a small landslide had covered the trail. Loose rocks and dirt made it tricky to cross, but I took it slow and managed fine. About a mile further, I started to get the feeling again that something wasn't right. It wasn't anything I could see or hear. It was just a tightness in my chest, a slight unease in my gut. I brushed it off and kept walking, but the feeling didn't go away. I decided to stop early and set up camp before sunset. I found a clearing with soft ground and a small stream nearby. Seemed like a good spot. I pitched my tent, made a fire with some dry twigs and branches, and ate another simple meal. The feeling of unease still lingered, though. I kept looking over my shoulder, listening for sounds in the woods. But there was nothing, no movement, just that same unnatural quiet. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound set my heart racing. Once, I thought I heard footsteps outside my tent, slow and deliberate. I held my breath and waited, clutching my knife in my sleeping bag. But after a minute, the sound faded, and I told myself it was probably a deer or the wind. Still, I didn't fall asleep again until almost morning. When I stepped out of the tent just after sunrise, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Near the edge of the clearing, where the grass was flattened a bit, I saw what looked like a footprint. It wasn't mine. It was longer, narrower, and deeper in the heel. Just one print, but enough to make my skin crawl. I quickly packed up, skipped breakfast, and got back on the trail. My goal was to reach the last leg of the loop and get back to my truck by nightfall. I moved quickly, barely stopping for water. I kept looking over my shoulder, listening for movement, but everything stayed silent. Around midday, I reached a fork in the trail. One path went uphill back toward the ridge. The other dipped down into a valley. According to my map, both would eventually meet the logging road, but the ridge trail was shorter and more direct. I chose that one. As I climbed, the wind picked up. Clouds started to roll in, turning the sky a flat gray. I checked my watch, 2:30 p.m. I figured I had about 4 more hours of daylight. I pushed on, legs aching, breathing hard. Then I heard it, a sharp, clear sound from behind me, like a rock clattering against another rock. I froze, waited, nothing. I took a few more steps. There it was again. This time I turned around fast, scanning the trees behind me. I couldn't see anything, no movement, but the feeling in my chest grew stronger. I wasn't alone. I started hiking faster, nearly jogging uphill. My heart was pounding now. Every few minutes I'd hear another sound. Twigs snapping, rocks shifting, something that was definitely not natural. I never saw anything, but I knew something or someone was back there. By the time I reached the top of the ridge, I was sweating and out of breath. The trail started descending, winding through a thicker patch of woods. The trees here were dense, the underbrush high. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. I moved quickly but carefully. Every muscle in my body was tense. I didn't stop for anything, not water, not rest. I just wanted to get back to my truck. At one point, I passed an old hunting blind, half collapsed and covered in moss. Something about it made me stop. On the wooden frame, I saw what looked like claw marks. Not from an animal, but long, straight gouges, like someone had dragged a blade across the wood. I didn't stay long. About a mile later, the trail started to level out. I knew I was getting close to the road, but then I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was a backpack, just lying there in the middle of the trail, faded red, dirty, with one strap torn. It looked old, sun-bleached, and weathered. I stepped closer and saw that it was partially unzipped. I didn't touch it. I looked around. The forest was silent again, that crushing, eerie silence. I moved past the backpack and kept walking, now almost running. Finally, after what felt like forever, I reached the edge of the woods. I could see my truck in the distance, parked where I'd left it. But something wasn't right. One of the doors was slightly open. My stomach dropped. I hadn't left it like that. I know I hadn't. I approached slowly, heart pounding. When I got closer, I saw the driver's door had been pried open. The lock was broken, twisted. I looked inside. Everything was ransacked. Glove box open, papers everywhere, gear scattered. Nothing important was missing, but it was clear someone had been inside. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The drive back down the logging road was tense. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see someone in the rear view, but I didn't. When I finally got home, I reported the break-in, but nothing ever came of it. They said maybe it was a bear or some random vandal, but I know what I felt out there. I know I wasn't alone. I still think about that footprint, that backpack, the marks on the wood, and that feeling in my gut that told me to run. I haven't gone hiking alone since, and I don't think I ever will again. It was the second week of October when I decided to hike alone through part of the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. I had planned it out weeks in advance, picked the trails carefully, checked weather updates, and packed all the right gear. I wasn't new to hiking, but I hadn't done a solo trip in months. Something about being deep in the mountains alone always gave me a strange mix of peace and alertness. Maybe that balance was what kept me coming back. I started my hike on a Wednesday morning, early enough that the sun was just beginning to stretch over the ridge. The air was sharp and cold. I could see my breath. My backpack was heavy, but it felt good pressing into my back. My boots were tied tight, my water was full, and I had about 4 days' worth of supplies. The trail was rough and steep in some areas, mostly covered in packed dirt and broken rock. Pine needles crunched beneath my boots. As I climbed higher, the trees began to thin, giving way to wide, rocky meadows and tall, yellowing grasses. I saw a few deer off in the distance and even crossed fresh bear scat once. I kept bear spray strapped to my belt, just in case. By early afternoon, I had made it to my first campsite, a flat patch of ground near a shallow stream. I set up my tent, boiled some water for food, and spent the rest of the evening just walking near the water and letting my legs relax. The sun dropped fast behind the mountains. It got cold real quick. I crawled into my sleeping bag before 8 p.m., zipped up tight, and laid in the dark listening to the sound of the stream and the light rustle of leaves. The first night went smooth. I woke up early, packed up, and kept moving deeper into the trail. The second day was harder. The incline increased, and the trail wasn't well maintained past a certain point. It looked like barely anyone had used it for a while. I had to move slow in some places, climbing over fallen logs and stepping carefully along loose scree. There were no signs, no markers. I had a GPS and a topographical map, but even with that, I felt a little uneasy. Still, I kept going. I passed an old trail junction around noon and followed a path that wound up along the side of a steep hill. The slope dropped hard on my right, thick trees pressing close on the left. I didn't like how narrow it was, but it was the only way forward. I moved slowly, testing each step before shifting my weight. One wrong move and I'd be sliding down 50 feet into trees and boulders. By late afternoon, I found a decent place to stop for the night. It was a bit uneven, but it would work. I set up camp, ate a quick dinner, and took a short walk around to check the area. I saw some old boot prints in the dirt, maybe a week old at most. That gave me a bit of comfort. At least I wasn't the only one out here recently. That night was different. Couldn't sleep well. I kept waking up to every little noise. Twigs snapping, wind moving through branches, distant rustles that sounded too heavy to be just wind. I told myself it was probably elk or deer. I heard a loud crack around 2 a.m. that jolted me upright. It sounded close. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, hand wrapped around the bear spray. I stayed still for a long time. Nothing else happened, and eventually I laid back down. But I didn't fall asleep again. The third morning I felt exhausted, but I kept moving. The path climbed up again, cutting through a more open area. The trees were more spaced out here, and I could see across to the other side of the valley. The wind had picked up. It was colder. The sky had that pale, washed-out look like it might snow in a day or two. I checked my GPS and realized I was slightly off track. Not far, but I had drifted about a half-mile east of the trail I originally meant to follow. I thought about turning back, but it would waste a full day. According to my map, there was a rough connector trail ahead that would loop me back around. I decided to keep going. The terrain got rougher. Trees were more twisted here, with less undergrowth, almost like the soil had thinned out. I didn't see any wildlife anymore. No birds, no squirrels, just silence. The wind was the only thing I heard for hours. Around mid-afternoon, I came across something strange. There was a small clearing off the trail with what looked like the remains of a collapsed structure. Maybe an old hunting cabin or ranger shack, long since rotted away. Only a few wooden beams remained, half buried in leaves and moss. I walked over, curious, and saw a rusted metal frame that looked like a cot. Old, torn fabric hung off one side. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, feeling unsettled. Something about the place felt wrong. I left quickly and got back on the trail. Not long after that, things started to feel off. I noticed I was hearing things that didn't match the wind or trees. Faint snapping sounds like footsteps. Sometimes they'd be behind me, sometimes off to the side. Every time I stopped, everything went quiet. I started checking over my shoulder more and more. I even started glancing up into the trees, thinking maybe something was watching from above. But I saw nothing. My pace picked up. I was sweating even though it was cold. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I felt like I was being followed. As the light started to fade, I couldn't find a proper campsite. The ground was uneven, and the trees grew in twisted clumps. I ended up stopping in a cramped, slightly sloped area with just enough room to set up my tent. I didn't even eat. I just drank some water and crawled inside, locking my knife in one hand and the bear spray in the other. That night was worse than the one before. I heard walking, definite walking, slow, steady footsteps outside my tent. Not close, but not far either. They circled around and then stopped. Then nothing. I held my breath for what felt like hours. My eyes stayed wide open in the dark. I couldn't hear breathing or talking, just the occasional crack of a twig. At some point, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up, it was barely light. I packed everything in record time and pushed on. My body ached, my head hurt, and my stomach growled. I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to a main trail or somewhere with a clear marker. Late that morning, I saw what looked like another set of boot prints. Fresh, only a few hours old at most. They weren't mine. My heart dropped. Someone else was out here, and from the looks of it, they were close. I didn't like that. I didn't like any of it. Around noon, I spotted something hanging in a tree. It was a red flannel shirt, faded and torn. It looked like it had been there a while, fluttering lightly in the wind. Beneath it, nailed into the tree, was a small strip of wood. Someone had carved a name into it, but the letters were weathered and hard to read. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't a memorial. It didn't feel like one. It felt like a warning. I moved fast. I didn't stop for breaks. I ignored the pain in my knees, the burning in my calves. I just kept going. By late afternoon, I started seeing familiar terrain again. I checked my GPS and saw that I was close to rejoining the original trail loop. Relief hit me like a wave, but I didn't slow down. I followed the path down a steep slope, slid in a few spots, and didn't stop until I hit the junction I remembered from day 2. I camped one more night, but it felt different now. The sounds were normal again. Just wind, distant birds, the occasional creak of trees. I still barely slept, but nothing strange happened. By mid-morning on the 4th day, I made it back to the trailhead. My car was still there, undisturbed. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there for almost 20 minutes before I even started the engine. I didn't talk to anyone about what happened. I still haven't. I've looked online to see if others have had weird experiences in that part of the mountains, but there's nothing solid. Just rumors. No names, no reports. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know I won't ever hike alone again. It started as a simple hiking trip. I had done many of them over the past few years, some alone, some with a group. This time, I wanted to do it solo again, just to clear my mind and get away from the noise of daily life. I picked a route that wasn't too far from home, about a 4-hour drive out into the mountains in northern Idaho. The trail was called Pine Ridge Loop. It was a lesser-known area but still mapped and used by hikers who didn't want the crowds. I planned a 2-night trip, maybe 3 depending on how things felt. I packed light but smart. I had enough food, a reliable water filter, and all the basic gear. I brought my small tent, a sleeping bag that could handle chilly nights, and a solar-powered battery bank to keep my phone charged. I knew I wouldn't have signal, but I liked to take photos and use the GPS offline. The drive up was smooth. It was early October. The air had that dry, crisp feel to it, and the leaves were turning. The colors on the mountain roads were stunning. Reds, yellows, oranges all mixed in. I parked my car at the designated trailhead and locked it up. I checked the logbook at the trailhead kiosk. Only one other person had signed in over the past week. I started hiking around 10 a.m. The trail was quiet. I walked under thick pine trees for the first few miles, with only the sound of my boots on dry needles and the occasional bird call. There were signs of animals, scattered scat, the soft prints of deer, and at one point, a large paw print that I guessed was from a mountain lion. I noted it but didn't think much of it. By the time I reached the first ridge, the sun was high. I had a view of the valley below and distant ridges beyond. I sat there and ate a granola bar, took some pictures, then kept moving. The trail dipped back into the woods, and the light changed. It got darker under the canopy, cooler too. I zipped up my jacket and picked up the pace. I wanted to make camp before dusk. Around 5 p.m., I found a good flat spot beside a stream. There was a little clearing with a fallen log I could sit on, and a good spot to pitch my tent. I set up quickly, filtered water, and made a simple dinner from a dehydrated meal. I sat there in the quiet, just watching the trees move gently in the wind. Felt peaceful. I slept well that first night. The next day, I packed up and followed the loop trail deeper into the backcountry. I didn't see another person. The trail got rougher in places, and I had to stop more often to check the map. I didn't want to get lost. There were some confusing forks, but I stayed focused. I used rock cairns and tree blazes to keep track. That afternoon, something felt different. I started noticing things that didn't add up. A tree that had fresh axe marks on it, sharp and deliberate. Not the kind of thing you normally see in an area where people rarely come. Then I found a torn piece of blue tarp wedged in a bush, weathered but recent. Maybe someone had camped nearby and left it behind, but I didn't see any site or fire ring. As I walked further, I noticed something that made me stop. Up ahead, there was a pile of rocks on the trail. It wasn't natural. It was shaped almost like a marker. I went around it carefully, scanning the woods. It was too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the wind high up. By the time I reached a higher ridge where I planned to camp the second night, I was feeling uneasy. The view was beautiful, but I didn't take many photos. I kept feeling like I was being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me, or maybe the trail was more remote than I'd thought. That night, the wind picked up. I had my tent pitched tight between two tree trunks, and I used rocks to hold down the corners. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It was distant but clear, branches snapping. Not the wind, something moving. I stayed still and listened. More snapping, then silence. I sat up, heart pounding. I waited. 10 minutes. Nothing. I finally unzipped the tent quietly and poked my head out. Darkness. The trees moved with the wind. I used my flashlight and scanned the area. Nothing. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I packed up fast. I wanted to finish the loop and get back to the trailhead before dark. I was probably 14 miles out. I walked faster than usual. Every sound made me turn my head. Squirrels, birds, everything felt like it had more weight. My mind was working against me. About midday, I reached a narrow ravine that the trail crossed. The bridge was gone, washed out. I checked the map. It didn't show any detour. I decided to climb down and cross the creek, then climb back up. It wasn't steep, but the rocks were slippery. Halfway down, I lost my footing and slid, banging my hip hard against a boulder. Pain shot through me. I lay there for a second, then checked myself. No blood, nothing broken, but bruised for sure. Crossing the creek was slow. I got wet up to the knees. Climbing back up the other side took all my strength. When I finally reached the top, I sat down and rested. That's when I noticed something. Up on the ridge to my right, just above the trail line, there was movement. A figure. Not close, not far, just standing there. At first, I thought maybe it was another hiker. I stood up and raised a hand. The figure didn't move. I stared, heart hammering. Then it turned and walked behind the trees. I didn't follow. I just kept walking. For the next few hours, I kept feeling like someone was behind me. I didn't hear anything, but I stopped often to look. At one point, I thought I saw footprints in the dirt. Not mine. Bigger. Fresh. I finally reached a small open patch where the trail split again. One fork was overgrown and looked unused. The other looked fine. I followed the main one. I was maybe 5 miles from the trailhead now. I just kept walking, ignoring the pain in my leg. Then I saw it. A small camp. Not mine. Not marked on any maps. Just off the trail. A blue tarp strung between trees. Old camping gear scattered around. A rusted pan, some wrappers, and what looked like a small fire pit. But no tent. No backpack. No sign of anyone. I stopped and looked around. It looked abandoned, but not old enough to be from years ago. Maybe weeks. Maybe days. I moved on. I finally made it back to the main trail that I recognized from day one. The sun was starting to dip. I walked the last stretch with my heart pounding. When I saw my car in the distance through the trees, I almost ran. When I reached the parking lot, I noticed something odd. A second car was parked there. Old, dusty, dark green. It hadn't been there when I arrived. There was mud on the tires. All the windows were rolled up. I glanced in. Nothing strange inside, but something about it felt off. I didn't wait. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove. All the way back down the mountain roads. I kept checking my mirrors. I never saw anyone following, but I couldn't shake the feeling. When I finally reached home, I unpacked, showered, and sat down. My body ached, but my head was spinning. I went online to look up Pine Ridge Loop again. I checked forums, trip reports, anything. I found one post, dated from 6 months ago. A guy had written about hiking the same trail and seeing unusual signs deep in the woods. He said he found a campsite that didn't look right, felt watched, and left early. The comments below were mixed. Some people joked. Others said they'd had similar feelings in that area. I haven't gone back. I still hike, but not alone anymore. I still don't know who or what was out there with me, but I know what I felt, and it was real. Someone was there, watching, waiting, maybe living off the grid, maybe worse. I was lucky to get out when I did, and I won't ever forget that feeling. That place didn't want me there. It started on a Thursday morning in late September. I was planning a 3-day solo hike through the Alder Ridge Trail, a long stretch of remote wilderness in the northern part of the state. I had been planning this hike for over a month. I spent hours looking at maps, weather forecasts, and trail reports. Everything seemed good, clear skies, mild temperatures, and no alerts from the park rangers. I packed everything carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, stove, enough food for 4 days just in case, and my old but reliable GPS unit. My backpack weighed more than I liked, but I knew I had to be prepared. The trailhead was about a 5-hour drive from my place. I left around 4 a.m. to avoid traffic and made good time. I reached the gravel parking lot by 9:30, and there were only 2 other cars there. I signed in at the registry box, wrote down my route and expected return date, and then locked up my car and hit the trail. The first day was calm and beautiful. The trail was narrow, winding through thick pine forests that smelled like sap and earth. The sun filtered through the branches, making patches of gold on the forest floor. I took my time, stopping to drink water or just breathe in the quiet. Occasionally, I saw squirrel tracks or signs of deer. Once, I spotted a black bear in the distance, but it took off the moment it saw me. I hiked about 12 miles that first day and reached a small clearing by late afternoon. There was a flat area for my tent and a small stream nearby where I filtered water. I cooked some rice and tuna, ate slowly while watching the trees sway in the wind, then cleaned up and crawled into my sleeping bag. I slept well that night, only waking up once when an owl hooted close by. The second day started early. I boiled water for coffee and oatmeal, packed up camp, and continued along the trail. It climbed steadily higher, and by mid-morning, I was walking along a ridge with wide views of the valley below. I felt a little sore from the previous day, but nothing serious. Around noon, I reached a fork in the trail. One path continued west, following the main loop. The other went north, cutting through an older, less used part of the forest. The map showed both routes eventually rejoined, but the northern path would save me about 5 miles. I checked my GPS, made sure I had signal, and decided to take the shortcut. The first few miles of the new trail were fine. It was narrower with more overgrowth, but still easy to follow. I passed a few old trail markers and signs of use, like boot prints and broken branches. But by late afternoon, things started to change. The trail became harder to see. Some parts were washed out from recent rain. I had to climb over fallen trees and bushwhack through thick brush. I kept checking my GPS, which still showed I was on the right track, but it was definitely slower going. I didn't feel worried, just tired and annoyed. By the time I found a place to camp, I had only made about 8 miles. It was a small hollow between two ridges, damp and dark. The trees were closer together here, and the ground was soft with moss. I set up my tent, ate a quick dinner of jerky and nuts, and lay down early. But I didn't sleep as well that night. I kept hearing things outside, branches snapping, rustling in the underbrush. I told myself it was probably raccoons or deer, but it still put me on edge. I kept my knife close, just in case. The next morning was cold and foggy. I had a hard time warming up, and my socks were damp from the dew. I packed up quickly and kept moving. My GPS still showed the trail curving back toward the main loop. I was maybe a day away from rejoining it, but something about the woods felt off. The trees looked different, older, more twisted. The ground was uneven, and I kept tripping on roots or slipping on wet rocks. Around mid-morning, I came across something strange. An old, rusted hunting blind, maybe 20 feet up in a tree. The ladder was falling apart, and there were vines growing through the wooden platform. Nearby, I found an old metal thermos, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up and turned it over. The bottom was stamped with a company name that hadn't existed in decades. I felt a weird chill, not from the cold, but from the thought of how long it had been since anyone had passed this way. I kept moving. The trail disappeared completely after a while. I tried to follow my GPS, but the signal started jumping around. It would show me 50 feet ahead, then suddenly place me 100 feet behind. I double-checked the coordinates against the map I had printed, but nothing seemed to match. I tried to backtrack, but everything looked the same. I started to panic a little. By afternoon, I admitted to myself I was lost. Not completely lost, I still had food, water, gear, but I didn't know exactly where I was or how to get back to the main trail. I decided to follow a dry creek bed downhill, hoping it would lead to a larger stream or something recognizable. It was hard going. The rocks were slippery, and the banks were steep in places. Once, I slipped and banged my shin on a rock, cutting it open. It wasn't deep, but it bled a lot. I cleaned it with some water and used a bandage from my kit. The creek led me to a wide ravine, and there I found something even more strange. A collapsed wooden cabin, half buried in dirt and leaves. It looked like it had burned down a long time ago. The roof was gone, and the walls were mostly fallen. Inside, I saw rusted cans, broken glass, and what looked like a child's toy truck. Everything was covered in mold and spiderwebs. I didn't stay long. The place made my skin crawl. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, but I felt more and more like I was being watched. I kept turning around, sure I'd hear something behind me, but there was never anything there, just the sound of wind in the trees. That night, I didn't even bother setting up my tent. I was too tired. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag under a large pine tree and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept jerking awake at every sound. Around midnight, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate crunching of leaves. I held my breath for a long time, heart pounding. Then silence. Nothing happened, but I didn't sleep again that night. By the fourth day, I was running low on food and my nerves were shot. I hadn't seen a trail marker in over 24 hours. My GPS was still unreliable. I tried climbing to a higher ridge to get a better view. From the top, I could just barely see the outline of a fire lookout tower far in the distance. Maybe 4 or 5 miles. It was my best shot. Getting there wasn't easy. I had to cross thick undergrowth and climb over sharp rocks. I twisted my ankle at one point and had to stop to rest, but I pushed through. I kept thinking about that tower, the chance of finding someone or at least getting a cell signal. The sun was going down when I finally got close. The tower was old and looked abandoned, but the metal stairs were intact. I climbed slowly, testing each step. At the top, I found a locked door and broken windows. Inside, there were empty water jugs, a chair, and a faded logbook. I flipped through it. The last entry was dated 1996. I sat down, pulled out my phone, and checked for a signal. Nothing, but I could see the forest stretching for miles. In the far distance, I saw the glint of a road. It gave me hope. I spent the night in the tower. I barricaded the door with my backpack and kept my knife in hand. I slept a little, knowing I was closer to getting out. At dawn, I started moving again, heading in the direction of the road I had seen. Took all day, and I had to stop often to rest my ankle. I barely ate. I was out of food except for a few crushed granola bars. By sunset, I stumbled out onto a gravel forest road. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. I followed it for another hour before I heard the sound of an engine. A pickup truck came around a bend, and I stepped into the middle of the road, waving my arms. The driver stopped, looked me up and down, then let me climb into the bed of the truck. He dropped me off at a ranger station an hour later. I was sunburned, dehydrated, and limping, but alive. They took my statement, gave me food and water, and called my emergency contact. My car was still at the trailhead. I learned later that the trail I had taken north had been unofficially closed for years due to safety issues and poor maintenance. It hadn't been updated on all the maps, especially older printed ones like mine. The GPS glitches were probably from the dense tree cover and remote location. No one could explain the cabin or the hunting blind. Maybe remnants of old settlements, maybe something else. But there were no missing person reports in that area, no strange stories. Just wilderness reclaiming what was once there. I haven't gone hiking alone since. It was late October when I decided to take a break from my usual life and go on a long solo hike through the Southern Cascades in Washington. I had some vacation days saved up, and I needed a break from the constant noise of the city. My job had been wearing me down lately, and the stress kept building. I figured a few days in the mountains, away from everyone and everything, would help clear my head. I had done a lot of hiking before, but this would be my first time doing a solo trip that stretched across several days. I knew the risks and I planned carefully. I had my gear ready: a reliable tent, a good sleeping bag, a loaded pack with freeze-dried food, a water purifier, first aid kit, satellite phone, and a physical map of the area with my planned route marked in red. The weather forecast showed mostly clear skies with a chance of light rain on the third day. It sounded manageable. I parked my car at the trailhead near a small ranger station. There was no one else around, just some scattered signs warning hikers about bears and how to properly store food. The forest was quiet and still, and the early morning air had a chill that reminded me winter wasn't far off. I locked the car, slung the pack over my shoulders, and started walking. The trail started off easy. A gentle incline, soft dirt underfoot, and towering evergreens on both sides. There were scattered patches of fog that drifted through the trees like lazy ghosts, but they burned off by midday. I kept a steady pace and made good distance. I passed a couple of trail signs and then veered off the main path to head deeper into the backcountry. I had researched this section. It was less traveled but still marked and known to be passable, especially this time of year. I wanted isolation, and I was getting it. By the time the sun started dipping low, I had reached a small clearing by a stream. The sound of the water was calming, and the clearing was flat and dry. I set up camp, made a simple dinner, and sat on a rock while eating. The air grew colder quickly after dark, so I crawled into my sleeping bag early. The first night went by without any problems. I woke up a couple of times to the sound of small animals moving around, but nothing unusual. Day 2 was tougher. The trail got steeper and narrower, winding through rocky hills and patches of dense forest. Some of the trees looked strange, bent in odd ways or scarred like something had scraped them. I figured it was weather damage or maybe animals. Still, I took mental note of them. As I climbed higher, the view opened up. I could see the surrounding valleys stretching for miles. Everything looked quiet and untouched. Around noon, I reached a high ridge where I took a break. I drank some water, ate a protein bar, and checked the map. I was right on track. My plan was to reach a small alpine lake that night and set up camp there. It was marked on the map, and I had seen a few photos online. It looked like a perfect spot. As I descended from the ridge, I started noticing more strange things. The trail looked less maintained, even though it was supposed to be part of an old fire lookout route. Branches were broken across the path, and there were no clear boot prints or bike tracks. I wasn't too worried though. Some areas just don't see much foot traffic, especially this late in the season. Then I found something that made me stop. It was an old tarp, partly buried in the underbrush off to the side of the trail. It was torn, dirty, and looked like it had been there a while. I didn't touch it, but I looked closer. There were rusted cans nearby and what looked like a broken stove. I guessed it was the remains of someone's abandoned camp. Maybe someone had tried to stay longer than they should have or got hurt and couldn't pack everything out. It was a little unsettling, but not completely unusual. I moved on, but that tarp stuck in my mind. That night, I reached the lake just before sunset. It was just as beautiful as I had hoped. The water was still and black, surrounded by pine trees and steep cliffs on one side. I found a flat spot not far from the shore, pitched the tent, and made dinner. As I sat and ate, I noticed how quiet it was. There weren't any bugs, no birds, not even the usual rustling of leaves, just the soft sound of water lapping the rocks. It was eerie, but I told myself it was probably just the elevation or the time of year. I turned in early again, zipped up tight in my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. That's when I started hearing something. A crunch, then another. Not small like a squirrel or raccoon. Heavier. Slow. I sat up, holding my breath. It sounded like footsteps. Human footsteps. They came from the direction of the trees but stopped before reaching the tent. I waited, heart pounding, straining to hear more. After about 10 minutes, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I checked around the camp. There weren't any clear footprints, just some scuffed pine needles. I couldn't tell if it was animal or person. I packed up and got moving quickly. I was supposed to circle around the far side of the lake and then follow a trail that looped back toward the ridge. The trail on that side was worse, almost non-existent in some places. I followed the map closely, checking every few hundred feet. Then something else caught my eye, a jacket. It was stuck in the branches of a small pine tree, faded red. I climbed up to it and saw that it was torn down the back. Old bloodstains, brown and flaked. I stood there for a long time staring at it. I didn't want to touch it. It had clearly been out there for a while. That was when I started getting seriously uneasy. I decided to cut the trip short. I planned to take the fastest route back toward the car, even if it meant backtracking the way I came. I marked my location on the map, turned around, and started walking. I hiked fast that day. No breaks, just short stops to drink water or check my direction. I kept looking over my shoulder. Once, I thought I heard something behind me, like quick steps, but when I turned, there was nothing, just the trees. I kept walking. By late afternoon, I got back to the ridge and took the same path I had come down from the day before. It was harder going uphill and I was tired, but I didn't want to stop. I pushed until the light started to fade. I set up my tent behind a group of large boulders, hoping the wind would be less rough there. That night was worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of rocks shifting, not falling, being moved. Something was near the boulders. I didn't move. I just listened. I could hear something breathing, slow and steady. It was so close. Then, just like the night before, it stopped. Silence. I laid there frozen until sunrise. When it got light, I packed up fast and started moving. I was still about a full day's hike from the trailhead. I tried to keep calm, but my nerves were raw. Every broken twig made me flinch. Then, about 3 miles from the car, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A backpack, not mine. It was leaning against a tree, zipped up but dirty. I checked around it. No one. No trail leading away. I crouched down and carefully opened the top. Inside were old clothes, a crushed water bottle, and a notebook. The notebook was damp but mostly intact. The pages were smudged, but I could still read most of it. It was a journal. Someone had been writing about their own solo trip. The first few entries were normal, even excited. Then, around the 5th page, the tone changed. The writer talked about hearing someone outside their tent. They thought it was a hunter. Then they found things moved in their camp. They mentioned seeing a person watching them from the trees. The last entry was short. It just said, "I think someone's following me." That was it. I dropped the notebook, stood up, and kept walking. When I finally saw the ranger station, I almost cried. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there, breathing hard. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell the rangers. I just drove away. I didn't want to explain any of it. I didn't even want to think about it. It's been months now. I haven't gone hiking since. I still have that map, the one with the red line showing the route. Sometimes I look at it and wonder who the backpack belonged to. I wonder how long that jacket had been in the tree. And I wonder if I was just unlucky, or if I got away from something that didn't want me there. I still wake up at night sometimes, hearing the sound of footsteps in my head. Heavy, slow, getting closer. I've always loved hiking alone. Something about being away from everything, the traffic, the noise, the people, makes me feel like I can breathe again. I'm not a hardcore survivalist or anything, but I've been hiking solo for over 10 years, and I thought I knew what I was doing. That's probably why this happened. I got too comfortable, too confident, and I almost didn't make it back. It started in late September, up in Washington State. The weather was still warm during the day, but cool enough at night to remind me that fall was coming fast. I had taken a week off work, loaded up my pack, and drove toward the Cascade Range. I wanted to do a 3-day loop hike near Lake Chelan, through an area I hadn't explored before. It was supposed to be peaceful, not too crowded, and perfect for what I needed: some quiet time in nature. The first day went smoothly. I parked my car at a small trailhead just before noon, filled out a permit form, and set out. The trail was a mix of dirt and pine needles, winding through forest and opening up now and then to reveal wide views of hills and ridges in the distance. I hiked for about 7 hours that day, stopping every now and then to take pictures or eat a snack. I didn't see another person the whole time. That night, I camped beside a small creek and slept well under the stars. I woke up with the sun, made instant coffee, and ate a protein bar. The second day was longer. I knew I had about 12 miles to cover if I wanted to make it to the next creek that was marked on my map. It was a dry stretch with no water in between, so I made sure to fill both of my bottles before heading out. About 3 hours into the hike, I came across a fork in the trail. The main path curved left where I had planned to go, but a faint, less used trail went straight up a hill to the right. Someone had carved Lakeview Shortcut into a piece of wood nailed to a tree, pointing up the hill. I pulled out my map, and though that trail wasn't officially marked, it looked like it might reconnect with the main trail a few miles ahead. I stood there for a while, looking at both paths. The shortcut was tempting. If it saved even an hour or two, I could set up camp earlier and maybe even fish a bit if I reached the lake in time. I don't know why I assumed it would be safe just because someone wrote the word shortcut on a board, but that's what I did. I turned up the hill. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, but it was passable. I hiked up steep switchbacks for almost an hour, sweating and breathing hard. I figured the view at the top would make it worth it. I finally reached a ridge with a beautiful panoramic view of the valley and the lake far off to my left. I took a few photos and then kept moving, expecting the trail to slope down and rejoin the main one. But it didn't. It just kept going along the ridge, then down into thicker trees, then up again. After another hour, I realized I hadn't seen any trail markers or cairns. The faint path I was following had started to fade away into the underbrush. It looked more like a game trail now than a hiking path. I kept checking my map, trying to orient myself with the ridges and valleys around me, but none of it lined up. By the time the sun dipped low, I had to accept that I wasn't where I thought I was. I wasn't on any trail. I had completely lost the main route, and now I was somewhere off track with no sign of where the shortcut had even gone wrong. I didn't panic. Not yet. I've been off trail before, and I always keep a compass, map, and GPS with me. The problem was that my GPS watch had lost signal, probably from all the thick tree cover, and my compass wasn't helping much because I didn't have a clear sense of where north actually led in relation to where I'd come from. I hadn't tracked every turn I took on the shortcut. I found a flat area near a small clearing and set up camp. I didn't eat much. I boiled a bit of water and drank some electrolyte mix. Then I sat on a log, trying to make sense of the map with my headlamp. Nothing matched. The forest around me looked completely untouched. No signs of other hikers, no trash, no footprints, nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up to the sound of snapping branches and wind. Every time I heard a noise, I sat up and shined my flashlight around the trees. I didn't see anything, but the feeling that I wasn't alone was getting stronger. The next morning, I packed up quickly. My water bottles were half full. I knew I had to find a creek soon, or I'd be in trouble. I decided to follow the ridge downhill, thinking it would eventually lead to a valley, and valleys usually have water. It was rough going. No trail, just thick undergrowth, down trees, and lots of slippery pine needles on the slopes. After several hours of hiking downhill, I heard the sound of water. I almost cried. I scrambled toward it and found a small creek trickling through a rocky gully. I filled both bottles and rested there for about an hour. I soaked my feet in the cold water and tried again to figure out where I was. I had no cell service. I was completely alone, somewhere deep in the woods with no trail, no landmarks, and no idea which direction would take me back. My food was limited. I had enough for maybe 2 more days if I rationed carefully. I decided to follow the creek. It flowed north, and I hoped it would lead to a larger stream or even a trail. The going was tough. I had to climb over rocks, duck under branches, and step carefully on wet, mossy stones. At one point, I slipped and twisted my ankle a little. Not enough to stop walking, but enough to make me limp. I didn't stop, though. I kept going, hoping to find a sign of people, a fire ring, anything. That night, I didn't even pitch my tent. I just wrapped myself in my sleeping bag under a thick pine tree and kept my knife close. I didn't sleep. The forest felt alive around me, but not in a peaceful way. I felt watched, even though I never saw anyone or anything. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or any of that, but the fear was real. It came from not knowing where I was or how long I'd be out there. The next day, my ankle was worse. It was swollen and stiff, and every step hurt. I limped slowly down the creek, moving maybe half a mile an hour. I kept thinking I'd hear voices or see a sign, but nothing. Just forest, endless trees, and the sound of water. Around midday, the creek joined a bigger stream, and I followed it. I started seeing animal tracks in the mud, deer, raccoons, something that looked like a bear. I kept going. By late afternoon, I saw something that made my heart jump, a crushed plastic bottle sitting on a rock. It was old and dirty, but it meant someone had been there at some point. I started scanning the trees more carefully and finally saw it. An old, faded ribbon tied to a branch, the kind search and rescue teams use. I almost screamed. I kept following the stream until I found a trail, a real one with footprints and tire tracks from bikes. I dropped to my knees and just stayed there for a while. It took me another 5 hours to reach a ranger station. My ankle was killing me, and I had run out of food. I hadn't eaten anything in almost 24 hours. When I stumbled into that clearing and saw the building, I couldn't believe it. I knocked until someone came out. They called for help, gave me water, and let me rest. I learned later that I had wandered over 12 miles off the original trail. That shortcut? It wasn't even a trail. Just an old fire break that someone labeled as a joke or maybe a mistake. It didn't go anywhere useful, and no official map listed it. It took me weeks to stop dreaming about the trees closing in around me. I still hike, but I stick to known trails now. No more shortcuts, no more guesses. I learned the hard way that nature doesn't care how experienced you are. One wrong step and you can disappear. And if you do disappear, it might take days for anyone to find you. if they ever do. It started with a trip I planned months in advance. I had been working long hours at a warehouse job in the city, and I needed a break from the constant noise, people, and tight schedules. Hiking was always my way of resetting. No phones ringing, no bosses breathing down my neck, just me, the trees, and the trail. I chose a spot up in northern Montana that I'd read about online. It wasn't a popular destination, which was perfect. I wasn't looking for tourist-heavy trails or guided hikes. I wanted solitude, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you forget the buzz of daily life. The plan was simple. Drive up, park at the trailhead, hike about 15 miles in, set up camp near an alpine lake, and stay there for 3 nights. I packed light but made sure I had all the essentials: tent, food, water filter, maps, compass, fire starter, and a GPS watch. I didn't want to rely on my phone since coverage would probably be non-existent. I also carried bear spray, not because I expected to use it, but because it was Montana and anything could happen. The first day went fine. I started the hike around mid-morning. The trail was narrow, a little overgrown in places, and wound its way through dense forests before opening up into meadows. The views were incredible. Rolling hills stretching into the distance, thick trees rising like green walls on both sides. I saw a few deer, a fox, and even spotted what I thought was a moose further off the trail. The air was cold and crisp, felt good in my lungs. By late afternoon, I made it to the lake. It was exactly like the photos. Crystal clear water surrounded by jagged cliffs and pine trees. I found a flat spot a few dozen yards from the water, cleared it of rocks, and set up my tent. After a quick meal of dried pasta and jerky, I sat by the lake until the sun dipped below the ridge. The stillness out there is something most people never get to feel. It's not quiet like a room. It's quiet like the earth itself is holding its breath. I slept like a rock. The second day, I explored the area. I followed some faint animal trails up toward the ridge, climbed over fallen logs, and sat on a boulder for hours just watching the valley. I didn't see another person. I didn't hear a single airplane or engine. Just wind, birds, and the occasional crack of branches. That evening, I cooked again and made a small fire to keep warm. I turned in early. That's when things started to shift. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I don't know why. There wasn't a sound or movement that I could remember. I just opened my eyes and stared at the top of my tent. I could hear the wind outside, light but steady. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard a crunch like a footstep. Just one. I held my breath. Nothing else followed. I told myself it was probably a branch falling or maybe a small animal. I rolled over and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I checked around my tent. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, no trash rifled through. Still, the feeling stayed with me, like something had been close. I tried to shake it off and went about my day, hiking further up the ridge, but I kept looking over my shoulder. I found myself stopping often, just to listen. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd read too many online stories or watched too many survival shows. Still, I cut the hike short and returned to camp by late afternoon. That night, I didn't sleep as well. The wind had picked up. I could hear it moving through the trees like a whisper. I kept imagining things outside the tent, even though I knew I had everything sealed up tight and there was nothing around. Around 2 a.m., I heard that sound again. A crunch, then another. Slow, deliberate steps. I sat up, heart hammering in my chest. I reached for my bear spray and flashlight. I waited. The footsteps stopped. I didn't hear them move away. I didn't hear anything at all. I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, flashlight aimed into the darkness. The beam lit up the trees, the bushes, the edge of the lake. Nothing. I did a full circle around the campsite. Still nothing. I stayed outside for nearly an hour before going back inside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn broke, I made the decision to pack up and leave a day early. It wasn't worth another night of staring at the tent ceiling, waiting for sounds. I didn't feel safe, and I trusted that instinct. I ate quickly, packed everything up, and started down the trail. About 2 miles in, I noticed something odd. On a patch of soft dirt just off the trail, I saw a footprint. A boot print, not mine. It was bigger than my boot and looked fresher. I stopped and stared at it. My stomach sank. I hadn't seen anyone the entire time, not even a plane in the sky. There was no way someone just happened to hike the same trail and get that close to my camp without me noticing. I picked up the pace, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to run, but I kept moving fast, glancing back every so often. I started hearing things in the woods, twigs snapping, rustling in the bushes. Sometimes it was probably animals, but other times it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was being followed. I stopped, listen, and hear nothing. But the moment I started walking again, I'd hear the faint sounds behind me. By late afternoon, I reached a part of the trail where it narrowed between two steep inclines, almost like a ravine. The sides were high, and trees grew thick on both. Felt like a funnel. I didn't like it. I moved through it fast, head on a swivel. That's when I heard it. Something behind me moving fast. I didn't turn around. I just ran. Branches whipped my arms. Rocks slid under my boots. My pack bounced on my back. I didn't care. I just ran. After a few minutes, I stopped, chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. Silence again. Nothing behind me. I waited, standing dead still. Then I heard something up on the ridge. A movement, a rock slipping, then silence. I kept going. I didn't stop again except to drink water. The trail twisted through the forest, and every time it curved, I expected to see someone or something standing there. But I never did. The only signs were the occasional scuff on the trail, the broken branches, and the sound of something too heavy to be a bird. I reached the trailhead just before sunset. My car was still there. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. I threw my pack in the back seat and locked the doors. I sat behind the wheel for a while, just breathing. Then I drove. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 3 hours away. Only then did I check my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence. I never found out who was out there. I thought about telling the ranger station, but what would I say? That I heard footsteps and saw a footprint? They wouldn't do anything. There was no crime, no proof. Just my gut telling me something was wrong. I never went back to that lake. In fact, I haven't done a solo hike since. I still hike, but only with people. I still love the outdoors, but that feeling of being watched, of not being alone when you should be, is something I can't forget. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was something real. Someone real. That's what makes it worse. Because people are scarier than anything else out there.